Michael Jackson stood alone in the empty ballroom of Neverland Ranch, watching dust particles dance in the afternoon light. The silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. Outside, the carousel sat motionless, its painted horses frozen mid-gallop, their once vibrant colors fading under the California sun. He pressed his hand against the cold window glass and wondered when everything had changed. When had his sanctuary become his prison? The memories came flooding back without permission. He was 5 years old again, standing on a stage in Gary, Indiana, his small feet planted on splintered wood that creaked with every move. The spotlight burned his eyes, but he couldn't look away from his father's face in the shadows. Joe Jackson's expression told him everything he needed to know. One mistake, one misstep, one wrong note, and there would be consequences. The belt. The words. The disappointment that cut deeper than any physical pain. Michael had learned early that childhood was a luxury he couldn't afford. While other kids rode bikes and played in parks, he rehearsed until his legs trembled and his voice cracked. While they scraped knees climbing trees, he perfected spins on stages across America. The Jackson 5 became a sensation, and Michael became something else entirely. Not quite a child, not quite an adult. Something caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. His brothers had each other. They could joke, push boundaries, test limits. But Michael was different. He was the star, the one everyone watched, the one who carried the family's dreams on shoulders too small for such weight. At night, lying in unfamiliar hotel rooms, he would stare at the ceiling and imagine what it felt like to be normal. To have friends who wanted nothing from him. To play without purpose. To exist without performance. The years blurred together in a cascade of studio sessions, concert tours, and recording contracts. His voice changed, his body grew, but inside, something remained frozen. That little boy in Gary never got to leave the stage. Never got to finish growing up. Every album, every hit song, every moonwalk added another layer to the persona, but underneath it all, Michael was still that 5-year-old trying to get it right, trying to be perfect, trying to earn love that shouldn't have needed earning. Fame became his entire universe. The screaming crowds, the #1 hits, the record-breaking sales. Thriller turned him into something beyond a celebrity. He became a phenomenon, an icon, a living legend. But legends aren't human. They don't bleed, don't hurt, don't need. The world wanted Michael Jackson the superstar, not Michael Jackson the person. And somewhere along the way, even he forgot where one ended and the other began. Money poured in like rain, but it couldn't fill the emptiness. Awards lined his shelves, but they couldn't answer the questions that kept him awake at night. Who was he beneath the sequin gloves and fedora? What did he want when no one was watching? The simple answer terrified him because it was so ordinary, so human, so impossible. He wanted to be a kid. He wanted to play. He wanted to protect other children from losing what he'd lost. Neverland Ranch became his answer to the unanswerable. If he couldn't reclaim his own childhood, he would create a place where others could keep theirs. Every ride, every animal, every inch of the property was designed with one purpose: to preserve innocence. Children would come, and for a few precious hours, they could be exactly what they were supposed to be. Free. Happy. Protected from the harsh world that waited beyond the gates. But as Michael stood in that empty ballroom, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, a dark thought crept into his mind. He had built this kingdom to protect children, to give them what he'd never had. He had opened his heart and his home. He had trusted in the goodness of his intentions. What he didn't know, what he couldn't see coming, was that the very thing he created to heal would become the weapon used to destroy him. No one was coming to protect him. No one ever had. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in August 1993. Michael was in the studio, working on a new track, lost in the rhythm and melody that had always been his escape. His assistant's face went pale as she listened to the voice on the other end. When she finally spoke, her words seemed to move in slow motion. A 13-year-old boy had made allegations. Terrible allegations. The kind that could end everything. Michael felt the room tilt. This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare, one of those twisted dreams where everything familiar turned sinister. But the assistant's expression told him this was happening. Jordan Chandler, a boy he had befriended, a child he had tried to help, was now claiming unspeakable things. Michael's mind raced through every moment they'd spent together. The movies they'd watched. The conversations they'd had. The trips to toy stores and amusement parks. Every memory, once innocent, now felt contaminated by accusation. The media erupted like a volcano. Headlines screamed across every newspaper, every television screen, every radio broadcast. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, accused of child abuse. The story had everything that sells: fame, wealth, children, and scandal. Reporters camped outside Neverland's gates, their cameras trained on the property like weapons. Helicopters circled overhead, trying to capture footage of the fallen idol. The world that had once worshipped him now watched his destruction with hungry eyes. Michael tried to understand how this had happened. The Chandler family had seemed normal at first. Jordan's stepfather, Evan Chandler, was a dentist with Hollywood connections. They'd met through mutual friends, and Michael had seen something familiar in Jordan's eyes. A loneliness. A need for understanding. He'd wanted to be a mentor, a friend, someone who could show the boy that success didn't have to mean losing yourself. But Evan Chandler had other plans. Before the allegations went public, he'd made demands. Money. Lots of it. He'd wanted Michael to finance film projects, to bankroll his entertainment ambitions. When Michael refused, when he established boundaries, everything changed. Suddenly, the friendly dentist became threatening. Recordings would later surface of Evan's conversations, his voice cold and calculating as he discussed plans to destroy Michael's career. But by then, the damage was already done. The investigation began, and with it came humiliation beyond anything Michael had imagined. Police arrived at Neverland with search warrants, treating his home like a crime scene. They photographed everything, catalogued his possessions, turned his sanctuary into evidence. Then came the worst part. They made him stand in a room while they photographed his naked body, documenting every mark, every detail, comparing him to the boy's description. Michael stood there, stripped of dignity, stripped of humanity, reduced to an object in a police report. His lawyers advised settlement. Fighting in court would mean years of testimony, years of media scrutiny, years of watching his name dragged through mud. Michael resisted. He was innocent. Fighting should be automatic. But his legal team explained the reality. His tour was underway, his sponsors were nervous, his business empire was at risk. A settlement wasn't an admission of guilt, it was a business decision. Pay the money, make it go away, move forward. Michael agreed to pay over $20 million to the Chandler family. The moment the settlement was signed, Jordan and his family stopped cooperating with the criminal investigation. No charges were ever filed. The district attorney, Tom Snedon, was furious. He'd built his case around the boy's testimony, and without it, everything collapsed. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already in. Innocent people don't pay $20 million. Innocent people fight. The settlement haunted Michael for the rest of his life. He tried to explain it, tried to make people understand that he'd been advised to protect his career, to protect his ability to make music. But the explanation sounded hollow even to his own ears. The truth was complicated, messy, unsatisfying. He was innocent, but he'd paid anyway. He was a victim, but he looked like a villain. The world didn't do nuance. They wanted simple stories with clear heroes and obvious monsters. His addiction to painkillers deepened. The pills that had once helped him cope with the physical demands of performing now helped him escape the psychological torture of accusation. He couldn't sleep without them. Couldn't face the cameras without them. Couldn't exist in a world that had turned against him without something to dull the pain. His friends watched him deteriorate, but their concern couldn't reach him through the walls he'd built. Trust became impossible. Every new friendship felt like a potential trap. Every kind gesture might be manipulation. Every child who admired him could become the next accuser. The thing Michael had loved most, connecting with young people, sharing joy, protecting innocence, had become the most dangerous thing he could do. His greatest strength had been weaponized against him, and he didn't know how to defend himself without losing the core of who he was. 10 years passed. Michael tried to rebuild his life, his career, his reputation. He married, had children, created new music. The 1993 allegations faded from headlines, replaced by other scandals, other celebrities, other dramas. He began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could move past it. That maybe people would remember his music instead of the accusations. That maybe he could find peace. Then came 2003, and everything shattered again. This time, the accuser was a young cancer survivor named Gavin Arvizo. Michael had met him through charity work, had invited him to Neverland during his treatment, had tried to bring some happiness into a life marked by illness. The boy's mother, Janet Arvizo, had seemed grateful at first. She praised Michael publicly, called him an angel, thanked him for his generosity. But behind the scenes, something else was brewing. The allegations followed a pattern Michael recognized with growing horror. After receiving help, after building trust, the accusations came. But this time, there would be no settlement. Tom Snedon, the district attorney who'd been frustrated by the 1993 case, saw his second chance. He authorized a raid on Neverland that looked like a military operation. 70 officers descended on the property, executing search warrants with cameras rolling. They wanted the world to see Michael Jackson being brought down. Michael was in Las Vegas when the raid happened, filming a video. The phone call from his lawyer came with urgency. Arrest warrants had been issued. He needed to surrender immediately. The ride back to California felt like a journey to his own execution. Every mile brought him closer to a nightmare he'd hoped would never repeat. When he finally turned himself in, the media was waiting. They photographed him in handcuffs, broadcast his mugshot worldwide, turned his surrender into a spectacle. The trial began in January 2005 and would last 5 months. Every day, Michael made the journey from his home to the Santa Maria courthouse. Fans gathered outside, holding signs, proclaiming his innocence, singing his songs. But inside the courtroom, he faced something far darker than public opinion. He faced the systematic destruction of his character, his reputation, his entire life's work. The prosecution painted him as a predator, a monster hiding behind fame and philanthropy. Janet Arvizo took the stand and delivered performance after performance. She cried on cue, gasped with perfect timing, played the protective mother with precision. But under cross-examination, her story crumbled. She'd previously accused other people falsely. She'd committed welfare fraud. She'd coached her children to lie in the past. The defense presented evidence of her schemes, her manipulations, her pattern of targeting wealthy men. But the damage to Michael's image had already been done. Young Gavin testified, describing scenarios that made headlines worldwide. But his story had problems. Big problems. The timeline didn't work. He claimed abuse occurred after the documentary aired, after the investigation had already begun, after Michael knew he was under scrutiny. Former Neverland employees testified that they'd never seen anything inappropriate. The prosecution's star witnesses, employees claiming to have witnessed abuse, fell apart on the stand. They'd sold their stories to tabloids. They'd been caught lying under oath. Their credibility evaporated. Michael sat through it all, day after day, listening to lies become court record. The stress manifested physically. He lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His face became gaunt, his movements fragile. Some days he arrived at court in pajamas, too sick to dress properly, too broken to maintain appearances. The world mocked him for it, turned his pain into punchlines, made jokes about the man who was dying inside. His children watched their father disappear piece by piece. Prince, Paris, and Blanket were too young to understand the legal details, but they understood that their daddy was hurting. They understood that people were saying terrible things. They understood that the world had turned against their family. Michael tried to shield them, tried to maintain normalcy, but how do you create normal when abnormal is all anyone wants to talk about? The prosecution rested their case, and the defense began dismantling it systematically. Character witnesses testified about Michael's genuine love for children, his charitable work, his gentle nature. Macaulay Culkin, who'd spent significant time at Neverland as a child, took the stand and firmly stated that nothing inappropriate had ever happened. Other young people who'd stayed at the ranch echoed his testimony. The pattern became clear: children who had nothing to gain told the truth. Those seeking money told lies. On June 13, 2005, the jury delivered their verdict. Not guilty on all counts. All 14 charges, every single one, rejected. The jury had seen through the lies, recognized the extortion attempt, understood that Michael Jackson was innocent. He walked out of that courthouse a free man, vindicated by law. But freedom felt hollow. Vindication felt empty. The trial had taken everything from him except his legal liberty. His health was destroyed. His finances were in ruins. His spirit was shattered. He was innocent, but he would never recover. After the verdict, Michael fled. Not from justice, he'd been cleared of that, but from America itself. The country that had made him a star had tried to destroy him, and he couldn't bear to stay. He left Neverland behind, left the animals, the rides, the dreams he'd built. The property that had once represented hope now symbolized everything that had been taken from him. He couldn't walk those paths without seeing police searches, without hearing accusations echo off the walls. Europe became his refuge. He moved from hotel to hotel, country to country, never staying long enough to establish roots. Bahrain offered temporary sanctuary, and he accepted the hospitality of the royal family. But even in exile, peace eluded him. Debt collectors circled like sharks. Business managers had made disastrous decisions during the trial, borrowing against his assets, making deals that favored everyone except Michael. His financial empire, once worth hundreds of millions, was crumbling. The pills became his constant companion. Painkillers, sedatives, anything that could help him sleep, help him forget, help him exist in a world that felt hostile and dangerous. His doctor appointments became drug negotiations. He knew the medical terminology, knew which substances provided which relief. He'd frame his requests in legitimate-sounding ways, talking about muscle pain, performance anxiety, insomnia. Most doctors saw through it, but some didn't. Some were willing to prescribe anything the famous patient requested. His children remained his anchor to reality. Prince, Paris, and Blanket needed their father, needed stability, needed someone to tell them the world wasn't entirely cruel. Michael tried to be that person, tried to create normalcy in their abnormal existence. He'd take them to museums wearing masks and disguises. They'd explore cities under cover of anonymity. He'd rent out entire theme parks so they could experience rides without crowds. It was childhood at a distance, filtered through fame's distorting lens. But inside, Michael was dying by degrees. The man who'd once commanded stages with supernatural energy could barely get through a day. The performer who'd thrilled billions with his dancing moved slowly, carefully, like someone much older than his years. Friends who saw him were shocked by his deterioration. This wasn't aging, this was something else. This was a man being consumed from within by trauma that had no outlet, pain that had no cure. The entertainment industry moved on without him. New artists emerged, new sounds dominated charts, new personalities captured public imagination. Michael became a relic, a cautionary tale, a former king whose kingdom had vanished. Occasionally, rumors would surface about a comeback tour, a new album, a return to glory. But those close to him knew the truth. The Michael Jackson who could create Thriller, who could innovate and inspire, was gone. What remained was a shell, going through motions, trying to remember who he used to be. Financial pressure mounted relentlessly. His spending had always been extravagant, but now income had dried up while expenses remained massive. Staff needed salaries, properties required maintenance, lawyers demanded payment. Sony Music owned half of the Beatles' catalog that Michael had cleverly acquired years earlier, and they wanted the other half. Negotiations became threats. His most valuable asset, the thing he'd worked so hard to obtain, was slipping away. In March 2009, a press conference was announced. Michael would perform 50 concerts at London's O2 Arena. The This Is It tour would be his comeback, his redemption, his return to the throne. Fans bought tickets instantly. All 50 shows sold out in hours. The world wanted to see him again, wanted to believe the magic could return. Michael stood at that press conference and promised them everything. But privately, he was terrified. Could his body handle it? Could his mind? Could the pills keep him functional long enough to deliver? Rehearsals began, and the truth became impossible to hide. Michael couldn't do it. His voice cracked, his movements were sluggish, his energy non-existent. The production team watched with growing alarm as their star struggled through numbers he'd once performed effortlessly. They suggested reducing the show count, making accommodations, finding ways to work around his limitations. But reducing the shows meant reducing the revenue, and he desperately needed the money. Dr. Conrad Murray entered Michael's life as a solution to an impossible problem. Michael needed to sleep, needed to function, needed something stronger than the pills that had stopped working. Murray offered propofol, a hospital-grade anesthetic never meant for home use, never meant for sleep induction, never meant for the desperate solution it became. The doctor would administer it at night, monitor Michael while he slept, wake him in time for rehearsals. It was dangerous, potentially lethal, absolutely reckless. Michael didn't care. He just wanted rest. The world saw glimpses of the rehearsals through promotional footage. Michael in a black jacket, fedora tilted just so, attempting spins and moves that once defined his artistry. The footage was edited carefully, showing his better moments, hiding the struggles. Fans watching believed the comeback was real. They didn't see the man who could barely stand between takes. They didn't see the fear in his eyes. They didn't see someone preparing for a final performance that would never happen. They saw Michael Jackson, and they believed in magic one more time. June 25, 2009, began like most days in Michael's rented mansion on North Carolwood Drive in Los Angeles. Rehearsals were scheduled for the evening. The tour loomed just weeks away. Michael was exhausted, having barely slept despite Dr. Murray's interventions. The anxiety about the upcoming performances had become overwhelming. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw 50 shows stretching ahead like an impossible marathon he couldn't complete. Dr. Murray arrived and began the nighttime ritual that had become routine. Small doses of sedatives first, trying to achieve sleep through conventional means. But Michael's tolerance had grown too high, his anxiety too intense. Nothing worked. As morning approached, Michael begged for propofol. He called it his milk because of its white appearance. It was the only thing that gave him what he needed: complete unconsciousness, total escape, hours of nothing. Murray finally agreed, administering the drug through and for while Michael lay in his bedroom. What happened next would be disputed in courtrooms and debated in documentaries. Murray would claim he left the room for only 2 minutes. Phone records would show he made multiple calls lasting much longer. What's undisputed is that Michael stopped breathing. By the time Murray realized something was wrong, precious minutes had been lost. He attempted CPR on the bed instead of moving Michael to the floor, a violation of basic medical protocol. He delayed calling 911, first calling Michael's personal assistant, trying to handle the crisis privately before involving authorities. Paramedics arrived at 12:21 p.m. and found a scene of chaos. Michael Jackson, the most famous entertainer in the world, was in full cardiac arrest. His body was warm but unresponsive. They worked frantically, administering drugs, performing chest compressions, trying to restart a heart that had stopped. Murray failed to mention the propofol, providing incomplete information that hampered their efforts. They transported Michael to UCLA Medical Center, continuing resuscitation attempts during the journey. Everyone knew it was futile, but no one wanted to be the person who gave up on saving Michael Jackson. At 2:26 p.m., doctors at UCLA pronounced him dead. The news spread through the hospital staff immediately. Within minutes, it leaked to media outlets. TMZ broke the story first, reporting that Michael Jackson had died. Other outlets scrambled to confirm, but the truth was already racing across the internet. Social media exploded. News programs cut to breaking reports. Radio stations stopped regular programming. The world stopped moving for a moment, stunned by information that seemed impossible. Michael Jackson was gone. The reaction was unprecedented. Websites crashed under the flood of traffic. Twitter experienced outages. People gathered spontaneously at UCLA Medical Center, at the Hollywood Walk of Fame, outside the mansion where he died. They brought flowers, candles, handwritten notes. They sang his songs, cried with strangers, tried to process a loss that felt personal despite never having met him. For an entire generation, Michael had been a constant presence, a soundtrack to their lives. His death felt like losing a piece of their own history. The investigation into his death revealed the full horror of his final months. Propofol bottles littered the mansion. Medical equipment inappropriate for home use filled his bedroom. Murray had been paid $150,000 monthly to essentially serve as Michael's personal anesthesiologist, administering a dangerous drug in unsafe conditions to a desperate patient who couldn't sleep any other way. The doctor was eventually convicted of involuntary manslaughter and served less than 2 years in prison. 2 years for helping end the life of the most significant entertainer of the modern era. The autopsy told the story Murray's trial couldn't fully capture. Michael's body bore the evidence of decades of physical and emotional trauma. He weighed only 136 pounds at death. His stomach contained partially dissolved pills. His veins showed damage from repeated needle insertions. His organs revealed the toll of addiction, stress, and despair. This wasn't the body of a 50-year-old man. This was the body of someone who'd been dying slowly for years, someone who'd endured more than any human should have to bear. As the world mourned, another narrative emerged. People began re-examining the accusations that had defined his later years. The 2005 trial transcripts were read with fresh eyes. The Arvizo family's history of fraud became widely known. Journalists investigated Jordan Chandler's father and discovered the recordings of Evan planning to destroy Michael for money. Evan Chandler would commit suicide in 2009, just months after Michael's death. Jordan Chandler would later reportedly tell people he'd been forced to lie. The truth was emerging, but it came too late. Years after his death, more evidence surfaced. Wade Robson and James Safechuck, 2 men who defended Michael during his life, suddenly claimed abuse. Their stories became the documentary Leaving Neverland, which aired in 2019. The film was emotional, detailed, and compelling. It also contained significant problems. Dates didn't align with court records. Locations of alleged abuse didn't exist during the claimed timeframes. Both men had previously testified under oath that nothing inappropriate happened. Both had financial motives for changing their stories. Both had filed lawsuits seeking money from Michael's estate. The truth about Michael Jackson is complicated, uncomfortable, and ultimately heartbreaking. He was a man who gave everything to his art and received brutality in return. He opened his home and heart to children because he understood their vulnerability, because he'd been robbed of his own innocence, because protecting them gave his suffering meaning. That genuine compassion was twisted into something sinister by people who saw opportunity in his kindness. They knew the world would believe the worst about someone so unusual, so different, so impossible to categorize. Michael spent his life trying to heal the wounds inflicted by his father, his fame, and his circumstances. He created Neverland to save children from the theft of innocence he'd experienced. He gave millions to children's charities. He visited sick kids in hospitals. He tried to use his impossible fame for good. And for these efforts, he was investigated, accused, humiliated, and destroyed. The legal system eventually vindicated him, but public opinion never did. He died alone, addicted, broken, and misunderstood. The final tragedy is what happened after his death. His children grew up without their father. Prince, Paris, and Blanket had to navigate adolescence while the world continued debating whether their dad was a monster or a saint. Paris attempted suicide, unable to handle the pressure. His mother, Katherine Jackson, fought to maintain custody while executors managed an estate that would earn billions posthumously. The music industry that had exploited him in life continued exploiting him in death, releasing unreleased material, creating hologram performances, monetizing every aspect of his legacy. Michael Jackson protected children because no one had protected him. He built a sanctuary because he'd never had one. He tried to preserve innocence because his had been stolen. And in the end, the very thing he worked hardest to protect, the welfare of children, became the weapon used to destroy him. He was acquitted by law but convicted by opinion. He was innocent but treated as guilty. He was a victim but remembered as a villain. The truth was there all along for anyone willing to look beyond the headlines, beyond the accusations, beyond the easy narrative of a famous person brought down by their own demons. His gravestone at Forest Lawn Memorial Park doesn't tell this story. It lists his name, his dates, his accomplishments. It doesn't mention the accusations that weren't true. It doesn't mention the pain that couldn't be healed. It doesn't mention the little boy from Gary who never stopped trying to earn love he should have received freely. Michael Jackson changed music, changed culture, changed the world. But the world couldn't change for him. It couldn't see past its own prejudices, couldn't question convenient narratives, couldn't protect someone who'd spent his life protecting others. He deserved better. The truth deserved better. And somewhere in that truth is a lesson about how we treat those who dare to be different, those who refuse to fit, those who give everything and ask only to be believed when they say they're innocent. Michael told the truth, but truth wasn't enough. It never is when the world has already made up its mind.